Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's August 15th, 2018, and today's video is the second half, or part 2 of Ask Me Anything, with comments and questions from Shrive. Yesterday I should have posted a video answering the first part of the question is, what resources or references would I recommend for incorporating into one's design of ponds and dams and practices? What are some best practices, I guess, would be the question. And I really don't have any book resources, and I explained that in yesterday's video. But I did incorporate at the end of my part of the video a video that was the introduction to the Earthworks course that Geoff Lawton, Geofflawton, incorporated. So I took Geoff Lawton's 2013 Permaculture Design Certificate course that was an online course, and he threw in an Earthworks course that covered dams and swales and various earthworks as well, as I recall. That video series was very instrumental in my further development, my greater understanding, and provided more resources for me to dive even further than those courses ultimately later on, and expand upon the systems that we have incorporated on the property. So that was all covered in yesterday's video, in the first part of this video. The second part of the video was, Shrive asked, well, what sort of things would you do differently if I know now, if I knew then what I know now? And that's really a fantastic question. I'm always redoing things. I'm someone who believes in failure as an appropriate learning step as well. So the first pond that we dug over 40 years ago, and that one's pond number 4, and we'll get to that in a little while. And the second pond we dug, the second pond that we excavated, was pond 3, and we'll get down to that one as well. Now pond 4 has been re-excavated and modified as a result. This is before me taking the PDC and the Earthworks course, but they were both the pond 4 was modified and the canal system was put in after learning about bioremediation and studying John Todd's work as well. So the other thing I want to say, to a little bit of background information, is this property hasn't been farmed in probably close to 100 years, so it's all regrowth forest and all. There's a lot of maple forest here. There was lots of ash wood as well, and lots of stone walls, and this is a gravel rich area. Now, not valuable gravel, as I'll show you when we get down to pond 5, the one I'm working on now. I'll show you that it's really poor quality sand as far as marketability, and really bony, stony ground. So with that background having been said, we're now up here at pond 1. This is a kidney-shaped pond. I have a second camera looking out here right now at the pond. And this pond is just under 10 years old now, I think. This is terrible, I can't remember. It's probably around seven years old now. But one of the things about this pond 1 and pond 2 were created in an area that was all second regrowth forest area that had lots of diseased ash trees, loaded with poison ivy, stone walls, very, very bony and all. And this whole area that we can see around here was all woodland, and there were some maple trees all around in here that I wanted to save. There were some oak trees. There weren't any oak trees in this area that we can see with the GoPro camera looking around right now. And what we did was we came in and we created hugelkultur pits. So what are hugelkultur pits? Well, I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner to the video I created a year or two ago regarding hugelkultur pits. What we did, and this is all serendipitous, I did not plan this. What we did was, instead of creating big, huge burning piles with all of these trees and their root balls and all. When we excavated all this area out, instead of creating huge burning piles, what we did was we excavated very deep, large pits. Some of these were very long, deep pits. And all of the trees were chopped up with a chainsaw. Some of the trunks were used for firewood. The root balls, all of the branches, all of those materials, all of the poison ivy, all of the stones were placed into these pits, covered over. The topsoil was lost for the most part during a lot of this work. Some of the topsoil was stripped off, and I've used that. But the topsoil wasn't very good at all. Very, very sparse topsoil and very bony. So all of that material was placed subterranean, below the ground, some of it 18 feet deep. I think it's about a 28-ton excavator was used for the main part of this function. We actually had 2 excavators here and dump trucks working. So as a result of digging these large pits, one of the things, and filling those pits with all the logs and all the stumps and all of that material, we had excess gravel material. And that was used in different parts of the property and stockpiled until I needed it later on, which I've subsequently used all that material. Hopefully it's not going to be too windy here. I'm going to move over to the side. So why do I say this was such a serendipitous event? Well, the reason that it has been is later on when I went to put in some water lines and we tapped into these hugelkultur pits, I discovered the tremendous resource that there was, a reservoir of water. You know, tens or maybe hundreds and hundreds of thousands of gallons of water are all being contained underneath this whole area. And there's rich carbon source as well. So we have all of these logs, stumps, tree branches, and stones buried in pits around here, which is a beautiful carbon resource, but it's also a tremendous reservoir of water. So I just wanted to give that background information. You can see more about that in the hugelkultur pit video that I mentioned. Over here, when we're looking through the other camera here, where the cattails are, right over in front of us here, in that spot there is when we dug this pond, we broke into one of those hugelkultur pits. And out of that came biologically active microorganisms. So immediately upon digging this pond, it became a fantastic reservoir for all the plants and all the fish and all. And this pond, although we have ponds that are much older than this, has an abundance of amphibian and reptiles in this, and fish species as well. So this has been a wonderful pond to have. And it's dug into an area that has a very slight slope to it. And there's a peninsula there. Hopefully we can turn the camera, you could see. I hit the screen. So there's a weeping willow there on the peninsula there. There's also terraces, small little marginal zones all the way around this pond, and every pond that I could put in marginal zones I did. So these ones are 3 to 5 foot wide all the way around, so we get various different plant species growing at different depths. So these areas are flooded during the springtime, but during the drought period this area dried up some. Originally, many years ago, when I moved onto the property in the 70s, there were still some springs. There's a spring-fed well over here, which is no longer spring-fed. And as a matter of fact, many of the wells have dried up all around the township that we live in, and we live in the township of Granby. And the town just approved a multi-million-dollar plan to bring in municipal water to most of the roads, and this has been going on for several years, and it'll be coming down our road. So many of the people voted to bring in municipal water because the wells that they had that were 30, 40 feet deep, or some only 18 feet, had plenty of water for their parents and grandparents' lives, but the water table has dropped so much. So that's a pretty big concern. On this property, since putting in these hugelkultur pits, even in these severe droughts, water has not been a problem in our ponds that are not spring fed, that are built in gravel substrate. So I'll stop this part of the video. I'm not going over the swales that go through the systems here in this video either, but I'm going to head down to pond 2 now. Okay, I'm coming down here. I'm at pond 2 right now, and it's got some algae on it. This is a non-shaded pond thus far. As I get that large rock pile out of here that you've seen in other videos, then I'll be able to plant more foliage or deciduous trees all along this side as well to block some of the southern light. Around this pond, as we have with our other ponds, there are some trees. We have some willow trees, and willow trees are actually fine to have in the dams or in the walls of the ponds. I know that there's been some concerns that I've seen online with people talking about no trees at all, but willows and bamboo in other parts of the country are two types of tree sources that can work, and these willows don't drink all the water to the pond as some people have suggested. So this is pond 2, and it's a relatively small pond and it has a relatively small margin. Right over in that area where that willow is, it's laying on the side. When the water gets a little bit lower, you can actually see into the one of the hugelkultur pits. So when digging this pond, ran into another one of those hugelkultur pits, so that stopped us going any further. Pulled out a lot of the logs and stumps that were sticking out in this area to try and make this pond usable. And it worked out really well. This pond never goes dry either. And there are a couple of things that aren't great about this pond. So the slope of the land really drops off from the other side. I'm going to try and move this camera here. So the other side of the pond over there to the point where I am right here. And I'm just going to walk down the spillway here for a moment. So right now I'm in the base of the spillway between two lion statues. One second, I'll just turn around here. And there's a couple of lion statues here. And the soil harvesting canal system is right down here in front of the GoPro camera. And it's hard to see, but right up there it works up right around, wraps around in front of the house. So it's a few hundred feet long, and it's a tapered surface. And this is the soil collection canal system. That's a wonderful habitat, creates a tremendous hedgerow, aquatic hedgerow, and this goes in front of the hugelkultur terrace as well. That has an abundance of wildlife in this. Everything from mammals to reptiles to amphibians to fish and insects, and certainly all the microorganisms. So now I'm at the base of this dam wall, which is approximately about 30 foot wide. Now, of course, the pond has all sides around it, and this is circular, but this dam wall this whole area really dropped off. It used to just come right down, and there was no dam there. There was no dam right up here at the top where I'm pointing right now, behind the camera here. We built this area up. Now this is the opposite in a sense to when you would construct what would be ideal for constructing a dam wall, although this works very, very well. So let me see if I can turn the camera. I'm going to turn the camera this way here. Hopefully this is showing up. So the slope of the external surface of the dam wall is rather it's a very gradual slope. It probably goes down maybe 1 foot every 3 feet, which would be really good for the internal surface of the dam wall, the inside of the pond and all. But the inside of the pond is much steeper. So that's probably extends out towards the center of the pond about 1 foot for about 2 feet, 1.5 to 2 feet for every foot in height of the wall. So, as Jeff Lawton explains in the Earthworks course, and has been Bill Mollison has described in the past, this is the opposite. This would be the ideal wall on the internal surface. But because we needed to maximize water storage capacity here on site, I reversed it. So I have gradually built up this external slope of the dam wall, and this is indeed the spillway. So when the water comes across this level area here where all the irises, and this is all spearmint in here, when it crosses this area, it's pacified through all this vegetative growth and distributed evenly across this area, and the grass is growing up here. So we don't get the erosion, and this dam wall holds up very, very well. I've gone over the canal systems in the past, like I have the swale, and unless there's comments or questions about that, I won't go over that any further. We're going to head down to Pond 3 right now. So far, one thing I wouldn't do anything different with Pond 1 if I had it to do over again. If anything, I'd probably make sure along these ponds, I'd have hugelkultur pits right along the base, just underneath the surface, because I think that's an excellent reservoir, and the hugelkultur pits that are all over the property tend to feed the systems. Actually, I'll turn around for a second. I didn't want to talk much about this canal system, but this canal system in front of the GoPro camera right now is fed off of the hugelkultur terrace, which is all of those, many logs buried underneath the soil up here, and I still have more work to finish up there. But there's hugelkultur pits just up there, up on the uphill side of it. And as a result of all of these hugelkultur pits on the whole area that we've looked at so far, even during these droughts, these hugelkultur pits gradually sweep through the gravel base and fill these systems. This is serendipitous. This isn't something that I planned, but it's worked out wonderfully. Now we're going into the bioremediation canal system here, which feeds into Pond 3 and Pond 4. So here's part of the bioremediation canal system down in here, and we won't talk about that. The water levels are quite low in here right now, and there's sediment inside of this canal system, which is a challenge to get out. Therefore, that's why I designed the soil collection canal system that we just looked at. So when we look at Pond 3 here, which was the second pond we ever had created, this was brought in with an extend-a-hoe. This was dug with an extend-a-hoe, like a backhoe with an extension onto the backhoe part of the system. This has an island as well. So another thing I would do, two things I would do with all ponds. So this one didn't originally have any marginal zones. So these areas around the sides, they may either drop off steeply or be slightly tapered. And this was dug between two stone walls, and I just got done removing the piled stones from the original excavation from this whole area here in the shaded area, and dug this evagination going into Pond 3. And again, the water levels are still low. But two things I would do with all pond systems: I'd always try and incorporate an island in the pond if at all possible, so that the wildlife, so we're creating more habitat, more safe zones for the wildlife. Being inclusive and bringing in as many species as possible is often serendipitously very beneficial. So incorporating islands and marginal zones. And a marginal zone is just an area that isn't as deep as the other ponds. It's a relatively flat or slightly tapered area around the plan where those shallow loving plants can sit there. And they're very good for biotransformation, phytoremediation, and the microorganisms sit in those areas as well. The other thing that's so beneficial about having the marginal zones, if you can have as much pea-sized gravel in those areas as possible, that allows many of the bacteriological microorganisms to inhabit that, and they can transform the waste products of the fish and amphibian species and the bird species into nutrients that are very good for all the plants around. So there's multiple levels of biotransformation, but certainly the type of biotransformation that we get from the microorganisms that occupy these very small pebbles, if you will, a little bit large coarse sand or small pebbles, that increases the biological activity of the area, and therefore the more fish species you can have. By having at least 3 layers to the ponds, you have the benthic, the really deep layers, you have the surface layer where some surface plants sit, you have the plants that sit in the central part of the water column, you have the marginal zone as well. Well, we're increasing the oxygenation, the microorganisms that all the insects feed on, and the small nymphs feed on as well, and that's important. The other thing with ponds is I like to have them not completely shaded, but a significant amount of it shaded in an area where we're experiencing droughts on a regular basis. Another thing is having your ponds as high on the property as possible so that you can utilize the gravitational forces for irrigation of your vegetation, whether it's your food forest, your vegetable gardens, or whatever. Or even being able to use the filter and use it for your own household water. So now we're going to go over, well, between these 2 elephants that we see here, there is an underwater, I think it's a 12-inch pipe that goes underneath the driveway here. And this connects the canal system from the first part of the bioremediation system to the second part of the bioremediation system. So far we saw pond 1, the kidney shaped with a willow tree at the top of the property. We saw the circular pond near the dam edge that was inverted. You know, the more gentle slope should have been on the inside of the pond. And then we saw pond 3, which was the second pond ever dug. Now we're heading into pond 4, which the second part of the bioremediation system, let me see if this is going to show. So there's lots of plant life all around the margins. There's plant life down in the systems in there. There's actually small little stools and all that I created so that the turtles and snakes and amphibians can get up out of the water, mainly for the turtles to be able to do their sunbathing as well. So now we're at pond 4. And this one's loaded with lilies because there's not too much sunlight here, and it's relatively shallow a pond. And we call this the turtle pond. It's absolutely a wonderful pond. And this is the first pond that we ever dug, and then I re-excavated it and put all these block walls in as I was learning more about bioremediation. And then we have pea-sized gravel in the margins all the way around. And the only thing I would do different with this is the canal systems that feed into this system. I did not have a soil collecting canal system attached to this one first, so I would do that differently. I'd also, instead of having a peninsula, so we have a maple tree down here with this in a peninsula here coming out, and the pond wraps around both sides of this tree. I'm just trying to, excuse my sweating, walk down the steps here. The frogs are jumping all over. So here we are. Hopefully you can appreciate the marginal zones around here. I'm standing in an area that's underwater during the springtime. The water levels come all the way up to the tops of these blocks, and the pond wraps around the other side. And if I could, instead of having a peninsula, but I wanted to save this tree, and I didn't want to damage this tree, so I didn't take this tree out and plant a tree and create an island in the center. I originally dug this pond with a bulldozer, then we came in with a backhoe and did it, and then several years ago we came in and used a large excavator, excavated the whole area out, and then I laid thousands upon thousands of 40-pound blocks all the way around here, 2 layers, two different separate walls to this. And I'll go over in a future video about laying block walls and retaining walls like this, these artificial man-made walls in the future, because there are some mistakes I made with this, but it's worked out extremely well so far. So this is pond 4. I'd like to have, and this is also a bioremediation pond, so it takes things like the organic stuff like our compost or paper products or anything else that we're breaking down in this property that gets into the runoff. Well, that runs through our soil collecting canal system, then into our bioremediation systems, including this pond here. Then it goes underground again to the next pond. Now, having some of these organic materials going subterranean allows us to see how well we filtered out the organic materials, because in an anaerobic state, many of these organic waste products that are in water systems, well, it looks like there's an oil spill on the other side. You'll see on the surface of the water, it looks like petroleum. And that's what actually happens in these subterranean anaerobic systems that go underground. I got a heron taking off here now. So this is pond 5 right here. This is the one I'm working on now. This is the chicken coop work area and the greenhouse that's going to go up here. There's a few things that are wrong with this pond, and I'm going to go around the edge here so we can see. Okay, we're back here at pond 5 right now. This is the pond that was put in later on. There's a couple more ponds that were put in after this one. But as I look over here to the west of the property line, well, this was all a big stone wall. Originally, when I first got here in the 70s, it was about at its highest point about 5 foot high above the ground, but it had been there probably well over 100 years. I don't know how long. And the stone piles, because they're round rocks here, not flat rocks, they roll off as the trees grow up between them, and it gets wider and shorter. So most of it was 3 to 4 foot tall, some of it 5-6 foot tall. And we wanted another pond over here for the wildlife. So we brought in about a 30-ton excavator, probably 27, 28 ton, and this pond was excavated. And previously I talked about it, the pond was actually larger initially, but there's so much sand and gravel here that the pond just went dry early to mid-summer every season. It'd fill up during the winter months, but even before the pond would thaw, you'd see the ice, the water would sink below the ice, and the ice would fall down and collapse each time. And it's because of all the sand and gravel. Now recently I created this, I'm jumping around here, I created this whole spillway coming from the northwestern part of the property, coming down along the fence line and capturing all of the runoff and bringing it around the area. Over there is where the Gothic High Tunnel will ultimately be, and the water comes down here, and as a result the water column narrowed some. Even though I had it wider than this, you can see it potentially was much wider. And you can see the rocks are left, but all the sandy material got blown out that goes between these rocks. And it just completely eroded. It hit some roots in this area. hit some roots in this area. Therefore the water jumped up, ate out the eroded all of the superficial soil material down here. It jumped again, hit some more roots, more sand down in here and all. And this is what our gravel is made of, very, very super fine sand and sediment. Now this is sand right here. The sediment is what's making that green sort of a creamy brown color. So that's on the surface there, that's all duckweed. There is some algae there as well, but the water is no longer transparent. You can't see through it. It's just a brown color from all the sediment. So the sand and the sediment, the sand settles up pretty high, and the sediment washes right down with the water, completely becomes dissolved in the water, and as a result all of the larger rocks stay pretty much stagnant, and some of them roll down the hill as the soil surface gets eroded from them. So it's a terrible idea digging in gravel areas, and this is an area where there's a lot of sand in places, and this happens to be one of those pockets. This whole area here where I'm not choosing to run the water through is also a lot of sand, and that's okay as a substrate below some sealing layer, and that's why I'm building these parts over here with the paper and cardboard products and all of the wood chips now, and all of this material down in here is what worked its way down the bank. And this area is all sealed, but as we get over here, there's more gravel and sand here. So when the water level gets up to this high, it can go right through this sand and gravel, right through that wall, regardless it's over 50 feet thick, and work over to the neighbor's property, or work down below grade on the neighbor's property. So now the one good thing was, what we did do was, originally the banks were like the ones over there on the opposite side, relatively steep banks, and they weren't compacted. So one thing I would say, that's besides having islands and ponds, which this one does have an island in this pond, having marginal zones around the pond is important. Not digging in gravel if you can avoid it. Having the dam part, so that whole wall across over there, I'm going to turn around so it's behind me now. So that whole wall over there is all stone wall at the far end of that driveway. Try not to build on a stone wall. Take as much material as you can and try and cover it, preferably not sandy material. And there's a lot of sandy material because this came out of other ponds. But we did create this slope. We created a much more gentle slope on the dam side. And some of this is, for every 1 foot down, we go out 6 feet. So we're even creating more of a barrier, but it's with sand and gravel. So now we need to seal the surface of it. The other thing that needs to be done is, once these dam walls are put in, they really need to be compacted, really compacted. And when we put these in, these walls weren't compacted. They should have been compacted. So compacting your walls, trying to cover gravel or sand, or dig out the pockets of sand and gravel if at all possible, or not digging in an area where there's sand and gravel is. And then the spillways. So our spillways have worked out pretty well. The spillway should be the lowest point for water to egress from the dam system. And I'll just mention this right now. In the other videos I didn't show this, but it looked like all weeds up along this margin right here. And what I did was I brought Bumblebee down, the excavator, took all those weeds, laid them down because that's more organic material, and took some of the soil that was around the base of these plants and put it on top of those weeds. I hope to get wood chips and put on the surface of this as well. So I'm getting close to having 3/4 of this pond wall. I've got about half of the pond wall with organic material done. The base of this pond has been sealed with organic material. That's working great. The only loss of water from the base of this pond now is through evaporation. But this has taken me years to correct, and I recommend to avoid this process if at all possible. One other issue I would say, and I haven't run into problems with this, because this video is probably getting too darn long again, is paying close attention to your spillways, which is the lowest point on your dam wall that you want the water when the water level gets higher than the capacity of the pond. Your spillway should be level, and it should be long enough that the water passively flows over it during the most energetic that the water has. So like around here we have tremendous snow thaws in the springtime, and if we have a rain in the early spring when the snow is melting and all, then in this system here we're taking the water as we're capturing from just every part of the property. I have to always make sure that my spillways are adequate to pacify the massive flow of water as well. And that's one thing that we need to do in our properties that we don't even have ponds on. So when doing excavation work around a home, you know, we often think, okay, let's move everything away from the house. You actually want to have the house a little bit higher on the property so that your basement doesn't get flooded. And you want to have a path of least resistance that isn't narrow, that isn't going to create a tremendous amount of erosion, that the water can safely and easily leave your property. And if your property is the lowest property on the site, you really need to think about, do you really want that property? Do you really want to invest in that property? And so I'm not going to go back to pond 6 and pond 7 at this point. I think what I'll do is I'll end the video here. I think I've discussed the things that I have learned over time that I would do differently. If I could avoid digging in gravel, I would. This whole property is sand and gravel, and I'll be digging more ponds in the future. Not this year. I apologize for all my sweating. But I plan on doing it, and I'll be creating videos as I create these other ponds, and it'll be in the woods areas as well, with other canal and swale systems going through the woods. So I hope this video was useful, helpful, informative, gave you some ideas, things to think about when you're designing and constructing your dams and ponds. And if you have comments or questions, please leave them below. And by all means, folks, have a super fantastic day. Bye-bye now.